Our moderator for this discussion is Darlene Gillard, who is the founding member, or one of the founding members, of Digital Undivided, and she's the current Chief Community Officer. She and her friends are going to discuss that very important topic of diversity in technology. Ladies?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're not friends. No, I'm just kidding. I met Rosario at the Grace Hopper conference back in October, and Erica, we just met this weekend, but hopefully we'll be good friends after this week. Also, thank you so much for coming. I know that the investor panel is going on too, and I was interested in that as well, but thanks for coming. As she stated, I am the Chief Community Officer and one of the founding team members of Digital Undivided. And Digital Undivided uses innovation to foster the economic growth and empowerment of Black and Latina women entrepreneurs. And so we have an incubator that we started in Atlanta early October, late September. We just finished our first cohort. And we had a demo day, which was amazing. You can look it up online. And so this is great to follow up on with this event. So thank you, ATDC and Jen and everyone for inviting me. I'm gonna let these ladies sort of introduce themselves. This is Erica, who is the co-founder of Women Who Code, where among other things, she leads new developer workshops. And to her right is Rosario Robinson, who is a director at the Anita Borg Institute, who manages all of their affinity communities. So Erica, if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, that'd be great.
So I am a software engineer and entrepreneur and community organizer in Atlanta. And for my day job, I am a software engineering manager at a startup called SalesLoft. We had a really good week. This week, we just raised our Series B funding, and we're valued at $100 million. So,
I really want to be your friend now.
and also, and I am also, when I do have free time, am a founding member of Women Who Code Atlanta, and there we do a lot with kind of getting women into tech. Also kind of being that network for women who are starting in tech and already in tech. And also one of our big initiatives for this year is entrepreneurship. So trying to move from just working for someone else or to actually creating from this technology that we're teaching them.
So I'm Rosario Robinson. Rose is fine. I'm actually a homegirl. I graduated from St. Vincent's Academy and Savannah State University. Hey! So it's always good to come home. I do come back and lecture at SVA and Savannah State often every year for the past 4 years, I guess. Things are changing, so I'm glad that I'm part of that change as well, or at least I hope to be. I have been in the tech industry, mainly in telecom, GIS, which is Geographic Information Systems, and then infrastructure, mobility infrastructure, for about 22 years. I actually joined one of the flagship communities of the current organization that I'm with right now, Sisters, and it's spelled with an S-Y, S-T-E-R-S, for systems. We are a community of computer scientists and technologists from about 80 countries around the world. It's a virtual community, and I work for Anita Borg Institute, managing all of the communities and technical programs. And our focus is on gender diversity, but we do have a lot of programming around affinity groups. There is an incredible need to find support, make sure that we're providing support for a lot of the intersectionality for women, including myself. And we'll get into that in the panel. But I'm so glad to be home. It's a lot warmer here. I'm based in Washington, D.C. So thank you for having us. We appreciate that.
Thank you, that's great. So I'm just gonna get right to this very first question, which is actually as part of the agenda. I think it's a good question and a great way to start. So where the tech industry has thrived, changing the way that we view news, listen to music, and our lives overall, why do you think there is a lack of representation of women and underrepresented groups in this space?
I think it comes from some of the education gap that we see in certain communities. Traditionally, tech has really pointed people who were interested in sciences and maths towards computer science and engineering. And without kind of that, that interest and someone to kind of point you in that direction, it's a little tough to realize and be exposed to tech at an early age. And I think that what we're seeing is, you know, kind of a reflection of the issues that we're seeing in our education system, being kind of the start of some of the disparity we see in diversity in tech.
Yeah. I think to add to that as well is access. Particularly in Black communities, we just don't have access to a lot of the programming or even internet, which is economically challenging for a lot of low-income families and communities as well. So those underserved communities just don't have access. Now we're using the technology, so it is imperative that we are part of that design, part of building and creating, because it only fuels much innovation and better products in the end. So really economics and a lot of access is, the lack of access is really the for me anyway, that I've seen in my community.
Well, we talked specifically, or you guys did, about women and people of color, because we're both, right? But intersectionality is learning how different parts of people's identity can benefit or marginalize them, right? Discrimination is not simply about race or gender or class. For instance, racial discrimination against Blacks also has gender-specific components that affect Black women but not Black men, and vice versa. So are you guys, either of you, directly impacted by these issues? And or do you work with people who are directly impacted?
Okay. So I am. I have always been. Attending an HBCU, I see the scientist and the technologist every day. That was my benefit. But then getting out into the real world, and you are the only person of color, and you are the only woman in that room all the time, every day, it has an impact on me. I couldn't often tell when I was working at a GIS company. It was a software company, and most of our clients were DoD and Intel, so a lot of suits and a lot of military uniform. But I couldn't tell if it was because of my race or because of my gender, where I was often challenged a lot, because that space was just, they haven't seen someone like me in that space, right? And I haven't seen other women or other people of color in that space as well. So for me, it impacted me a lot. Now, many people will say, hey, Rose, which one, what about the Black community, or what about being a woman? I don't have that luxury of separating the two. I am a Black woman. So that comes with a very unique perspective, but it is very impactful as well when it comes to having my input or having my perspective on some of the products and usage out there. Because you don't know how I use a Facebook. I use it like crazy, but I use it to the benefit of what you can really make money out of me, because Facebook makes money out of me. Seriously, I am that customer that makes money, but you probably have never tapped into me. And so that's where that piece is missing. So that's my experience.
And I kind of want to piggyback on something that she mentioned. I also went to HBCU. I went to Clark Atlanta University. And to her point, you don't see some of the diversity issues that we see in the larger tech industry. You don't see them in HBCU. So as a computer science student at Clark, there was never this understanding that pretty much race and gender become non-issues because of the ratio of men to women. It's pretty even by the time you get to the sciences and engineering. So it wasn't until really when I started grad school at a majority institution that I noticed like, oh, I am the only one. But what was really fortunate about that is that I was already invested. I had already been doing internships and really involved in tech and loved it already by the time I noticed that issue. So I really kind of want to point out the role of HBCUs especially, or all women institutions or other minority institutions for bringing more people into tech, bringing more diversity into tech. You look at, a school like Clark where I went and have that experience, but then you look at a school like Spelman where it's all women and all African American or mostly African American, and think about the role that they have in bringing African American women into tech. Or you look at a school like Agnes Scott, again, an all-women school, and think about the role that they have. So when people are interested in bringing kind of a more diverse audience into tech, I really want people to kind of focus on some of these schools, because if you haven't looked there, then you're really not looking for diversity. Is one thing. And then to your other point about you being Facebook's one of their biggest customers, this is one of the reasons why we need so much diversity in tech. And not just diversity, but inclusion. I know we'll get to that later. But you have people who are using the products that are not the people building the products. And so there are problems that could be solved. There are pain points that are out there for a wide group of people that are being essentially ignored because they aren't at the table, kind of helping make some of those product decisions, helping to even get people to recognize this is something that you could actually base a business off of. So these are some of the reasons why not just diversity, but the intersectionality of diversity are really big issues.
And I think just one more point. The message around diversity, right? For me, it is very normal to see us in this space. It is, I think it was Shonda Rhimes says, I'm not trying to make something that's totally different. I'm actually interjecting what is normal in this country to see. We see everybody. And so we are part of that everybody. So that message from diversity really needs to be about normal. This is normal what we're doing here, and we're just trying to close that gap. That's it.
One thing I want to say to that is that, when Digital Undivided started, we started at first with a conference called Focus 100 back in October of 2012. And the reason that we did the conference was because the founder of Digital Undivided, Catherine Finney, had been part of an accelerator. She was the only Black woman. There were maybe 4 women and 40 people in total. And she, being from Minnesota, was like, it was the first time that as a Black person I felt ignored, right? And she's from Minnesota. And so she, asked me, she was my client, I had another business, to help her produce this event where we brought together Black and Latina women, because I'm not the only one. I can't be the only one. It felt like I was the only one. And so we did, and it was successful. And after that, is when we started Digital Undivided in January of 2013. And so we had done a bunch of work over the years, and last year, 2015, in 2015, we did a report on the state of Black women in entrepreneurship, tech entrepreneurship in the United States. It's called Project Diane, a proprietary research report. And it brought up a lot of stuff, and it's been talked about from Silicon Valley to the White House. And one of the things, there are a lot of things that we found, lack of network capital and training. But one of the things that you mentioned, you both went to HBCUs, it's interesting that in the report we found that the successful startups that were founded by Black and Latina women all came from HBCUs, or many came from HBCUs. So that's pretty interesting. So yeah, when you are looking, you gotta look there, right? Okay, so you both talked about diversity and inclusion, right? So what's the difference? How would you define each?
So to me, diversity is appearances. It's like saying, oh, well, we have this many women on our staff and we have this many people of color, so we're solving our diversity issues. To me, that's separate from saying, these people have a seat at the table. These people are involved in making decisions. These people are just as crucial to the way our business works as any other person at this company. I think that's one of the major differences. Actually having influence is the difference between diversity and inclusion.
Diversity for me is bringing all of these different perspectives. So that's definitely including race and gender. But if you don't have but one perspective, how are you going to build on that product? I mean, you're thinking about a product, or you're thinking about solving solutions in the community. How can you come in and provide a solution without having that different perspective? And inclusion is really supporting a collaborative environment. You know, making sure that there is open participation and letting people know that it is okay. We want your input. We value your input. And together we are definitely going to solve problems in the world. So that's definitely for me for diversity and inclusion.
And I would just add to that, is soliciting that feedback. It's not saying that you're welcome to it. It's saying I want it. It's actually going out there and finding that person and getting their perspective.
Yeah.
Can diversity and inclusion only work as a top-down solution, or do you think junior level, mid-level folks can help make it happen? And if so, what strategies can be used?
I think the work has to be at every level. You know, it's about culture change. It's about everybody's input and everybody's perspective, but you can't do that at the top level. You can, but you need that buy-in as well. Because that's, you know, if you have your executive team is on point with this, then they're going to make sure it's all trickled down the board, right? You feed it into maybe your review, your annual review, your performance review. That's going to make a difference as well. But this is a culture change, and everybody needs to be involved in that culture change.
And I would just say it kind of depends on the company and how that culture that's already there and how open they are. Because I've been at companies where, you know, being in the middle and trying to make suggestions, especially towards diversity, just we're not going to get heard. But I've also been at companies where you could be the tiniest person on the totem pole, and if you mention that, they say, okay, that's something we need to investigate. So it really is about finding companies that are open enough to change and to ideas, and kind of, you know, promoting that openness, I think, is probably a foundation for any level, kind of promoting diversity and inclusion issues.
Yeah, I was going to say, from a leadership perspective, I think they need to have three things. That's transparency. They need to be very communicative about what's happening throughout the organization, and they also want to invite engagement. Because when you're getting everybody involved and everybody has a stake in it. You know, everybody is participating. So that's really, really important to have in your leadership.
Yeah, and it can't just be the people of color or women speaking up, right? So you got white dudes, you got access to everything, right? It's like you're going to the meetings, you're going to the parties, you know, you have to invite, you know, bring someone along with you, right? I think that's definitely important. So you sort of touched on this a little bit, but how does inequality manifest itself in the workplace? Can you give us some? Bless you.
Yes, bless you. So for me, it's been a few different ways. So sometimes it was access to opportunities that would progress my career. Sometimes it was just one kind of frustrating one was I was at a company, and it was a small project that we were working on, but it required math. And apparently I'm not supposed to be capable of doing math. And at the time I was fresh off of working towards my PhD, where I was doing a lot of kind of sensor optimization research, a lot of virtual reality, augmented reality, so lots of math. And so I was fresh off that, and then at this company we had to like make a pie chart or something, and it was gonna require trig. And they must have asked me 3 times if I was capable of doing this. And there were plenty of other people at the table. No one asked them these kinds of questions. There was a guy right next to me who was kind of an intern, but we were transitioning him into a full-time opportunity. And he didn't have his bachelor's degree yet. He was also going to have to do similar math. No one asked him this. And so it was just one of those things where you kind of become the target for, you know, or seeming like you're the bottleneck for this project was something that was really frustrating. And just to let you know how it worked, I finished it in a day just because they made me mad. But yeah, it's things like that. It's not getting, it's being seen as not capable or as capable as someone else, and so having that project or that opportunity passed up. And it's a lot of the reason why I started my own consultancy, Monsieur Studios, because I still wanted those really cool emerging tech type projects that I wasn't getting once I moved into corporate America. And so I kind of moved out of kind of working for someone else to kind of find my own projects and to find those kinds of things. And I would not trade that experience for the world. Like, owning your own business is a beautiful thing, and being able to kind of dictate your, or set the course of your own career was something that afforded me.
Let me just jump in for a quick question. So did you feel at the time that they were asking you that because you were a woman or because you were Black, or was it you just didn't know? It was like,
I never know. I mean, there were 2 women engineers.
Was it your age even, like being young?
It could have been. I was the youngest person at the company, or in that room for sure. So it could have been that, but they all, well, my manager for sure knew my educational background, so that should not have been a thing. Also, just to your earlier point, sticking up for the women and people of color that you're working with, because again, I was asked that 3 times at that meeting, and I think a manager should have stepped in and said, you know what, she's capable. You know, I know this about her. And I think that that's important, so that you don't kind of go down this terrible path. But to your, what was the question?
Was it because you're Black or woman?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't
Okay,
know.
so you
I don't know which
That's-
one is
okay,
less capable
yeah.
of math. I have no idea.
Well, I was going to say that I had a mentor, but that mentor also was my champion. So that was so important, because that's exactly what he did. Because he knew my background, he knew my work, we just worked along together, and every time I was in that situation, that's exactly what he did. If I said something, I can remember when I said something and I had an idea, and at probably maybe 20 minutes in, another guy actually repeated that idea, and it made it seem like it was his idea. But Patrick, he was just like, hey, yeah, I'm so glad that you cleared that up, because when Rose mentioned it earlier, it didn't really click, so I'm glad that you actually, clarified that for her. But it's so important that I had that, because that was that was when I just kind of elevated. I was like, okay, it gave me confidence too.
Yeah.
Because being in front of just folks that's just trying to challenge you all the time, it can mentally break you down. But I was strong enough, and I had the support behind me, around me all the time, to really elevate me and myself, so that I can become stronger, and I can do that for someone else as well. So that was really important.
That was actually my next question, and maybe you have a specific example of, a time where you had the support of a male advocate, and what kind of difference it made.
Yes, so actually, at the company that I am at SalesLoft.
Someone answer the door. That doorbell, what is that? Okay, go ahead, sorry.
So even at the company I'm currently working for, SalesLoft, I'm working with the director of engineering there, who I worked with previously at a company called Vitru that got acquired by Oracle. And he was, when I was there, this is part of the reason why I'm working at SalesLoft right now, he was such a great advocate. I don't even think he knew he was doing it. He was just a really supportive manager, and that culture was very supportive. So, if you were an awesome engineer, it did not matter if you were a woman, or if you were, Black, or if you were Hispanic. It did not matter at all. You're doing awesome work, so let's keep you doing even more awesome work. So I've definitely had that experience, and I'm pretty sure that I would not be working at SalesLoft without that support that he showed me there. For 2 reasons. I probably wouldn't have chosen SalesLoft. I might have chosen some other company. But I remembered that experience and being so well supported from before. But also, he really kind of made sure that they understood my background and made sure that they understood that, you know, this is a great person to add to the company. So absolutely.
Yeah, company culture is really important, and I think what has happened is, companies like Facebook or Twitter or whatever, they started, and then you hire your friends, and then it's your friends, and then the culture's there, and it's too late when they get really big. But newer companies like Slack, I understand, has hired like all these black women and all these folks, and it's such a great company to work for, apparently. I just wonder how far along how do you think we're doing as far as diversity? Like, how far along the journey are we in not making it an issue?
And I think part of the problem, especially given what you just said, if you try to solve this problem in Silicon Valley or the Bay, it's going to be a lot tougher because they're 20 years into this thing. So trying to inject diversity and inclusion now, after you're, thousands of employees into this, it's going to be a lot tougher. I think it's really the responsibility is on places like Savannah, places like Atlanta and Nashville that are growing their tech hubs, because we can start building that kind of diversity and inclusion platform right from the ground up, so that it's not, 20 years in, you can already show the fruits of taking this into consideration when you're building your ecosystem. And so that's something that I love about Atlanta in particular, is because I feel like I have a place there. I feel like I am influencing, the ecosystem that we're creating, and I feel like it's still, even though it's very empowering and it is already, fast growing and already, very profitable, I also feel that it can be moved and it can be kind of grown from the ground up. An individual can still make a difference there.
Location is everything, because I'm out at Silicon Valley once a month, and it's hard trying to change that culture because it's still the culture, right? I mean, you get these startups and they're only looking for guys that look like them. Because and that's where that bro culture comes in, and it's a natural thing. When we do extracurricular, we do something and we like it, or we could have a quilt, or go out and everybody watches How to Get Away with Murder, and that's that thing. You want to be around people that, that is something you have in common. But when you're trying to solve problems in the community and the world, you've got to have everybody involved. We talked about this last night, and Atlanta has really trajected me in my career as well. It was that community, it was that city that just came alive for me and really motivated me and challenged me. So a lot of the tech communities now, nobody knows about. Atlanta, Savannah, DC. I mean, outside of Silicon Valley, that's great, but there's all this other talent that we have not even tapped into. Savannah has just, every time I come back, it's just changed. I'm a foodie, so I'm always taking pictures every time I'm going to a new restaurant, and I just love how, everybody is included in all of that. And so, but nobody ever gets that. So location, coming out of Silicon Valley and making sure that we are hitting all of these other communities at a very ground level, but we have always been, to me, a very technical community. We have all the ports here. We have all of the, we have Gulfstream. If the hub here, we have all the transportation, because this supply chain that you have to filter out. We have always been a very tech hub, but we just never have been amplified enough. The opportunities here, we have colleges here that has coming out of talent. We feed that back into the community. Boom, that's what's happening. That's what should be happening. But because, there's a lot of, when the tech companies, they go to the big tech companies, they go to the big universities, right? Well, if they're having problems with diversity and having people not having students of color, then of course you're always going to get that same rotation. So having a very, diverse anyway, just trying to include a lot of different colleges and companies and cities, that's where you're going to have the change coming through. So I think from a very local level, I think we need to work on communities like Savannah, work on, outside of Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is great. I mean, it's a different feel out there too. But we are just as important, and we contribute a lot to our economy, a lot to society, but we just haven't been amplified enough yet.
And something I want to add to that is it seems like the recipe for building your own tech hub is having that kind of educational foundation. So having, a SCAD, having a Georgia Tech, having that school that you can kind of build off of. But then the next thing is actually having some place for them to go once they graduate so that they can start innovating where they are.
Right.
I know when I was kind of making the choice, graduating from Clark Atlanta, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? It seemed like the only choice was to go to California. And I love California, but I wanted to build where I was. And so, I made that conscious decision to build there, but a lot of students aren't going to do that because you got, Google and Facebook, beating down your door. And so I think it's the responsibility of the community to make sure that we have innovative companies for these students to come to. So then we have to kind of get out there and start our own thing so that we can start bringing other people along with us. I think that's going to be really important to building up the hub in your community.
And what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even tell you.
No, what you said, that's equity. We're bringing everybody along. That is what equity is, that we're bringing everyone in the community along up with us, everybody. And that's how we're successful. That's what success looks like, and everybody benefits from that. Not just a group of people, not just a race of people, not just a gender of people. Everybody in that community benefits from having everybody included into the solutions and the economy of that. That's strength. That's strength. You had a question? I'm sorry.
Well,
Yeah, we can do questions.
well, we can get into questions, but I did want to say it just makes dollars and cents, right? To have that. So I'll just say quickly, I tell this story all the time. October 2012, we did the conference. It was a huge success. All right, I bought my laptop. I'm like, I'm in tech now, t-shirts and all that stuff. I got my Androids and all that. And so we flew out to Silicon Valley and went to this thing. And the discussion, it was at a venture firm, and the discussion was about how you have to be in Silicon Valley. It's like if you want to be in tech, you have to be in Silicon Valley. And for me, as an outsider, I was like, that doesn't really make sense because technology is like the internet, right? So you could be anywhere. That doesn't really make sense to me. And it's super expensive. And there's all these barriers, right? And for people of color, we talked about this, we're risk averse. Like you can't pick up and leave your family and everybody and go to Silicon Valley and spend $5,000 a month on a room and, live and do a startup. It's just not possible. And so we decided at that point that we were going to go around the country to different communities like Detroit, like Charlotte, like Atlanta, to say to folks, look, you can start a tech company. This is all you need to do. Here's some lean startup principles. Come on, let's do it. And one of our very first pitch competitions was in Atlanta. We did it at Spelman. It was called Start. And Jewel Burke was the founder of Park Pick. And, she is from the South. Her grandfather had a farm and he needed a part, and the part, he had to figure out what the part was and go into town and do this and that. And she created this app where you can identify the part and get it more easily. And so that was her pain point for her grandfather, and that's because she lived on a farm in the South.
I just want to add to that, the company's called Park Pick.
Yeah.
And it was acquired last year, the fall of last year.
Yeah.
So just wanted to put
and
that out there for
And didn't she go
Jewel.
to an HBCU, I think?
I believe she did.
I think she did.
Yeah, she's originally from Nashville, but yeah.
Yeah, but she, it's like there are problems everywhere, right? And they can be solved using technology. You don't have to be in Silicon Valley, and they need to stop with all of that out there.
Yeah, I was just going to add too, because my grandfather, he had cornfields out in Oglethorpe County, Carlton, yay, Bulldog Country. But there was a NPR interview with, there's this group called Akira Chicks, and they're out of Nairobi. And they're teaching, they're putting all of their effort into educating girls, right? Educating girls in that community. And it's because they're not, and they said it, we're not trying to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. We're trying to make sure that our farmers can find seed so that they can, because it takes such a long, they have to take a donkey, they have to take a, hitch a ride, and then that's a whole day. And that's when you're talking about Georgia, this is my home, but this is a farming, state as well. So we have a lot of income that and a lot of products that we provide to the rest of the country as well. And so we can solve solutions here in this state. No offense to Silicon Valley, but that's what we need. We need our students graduating from SSU, Armstrong, University of Georgia, Georgia Southern, to make the impact and change in the state of Georgia.
And then we need to stop exporting our talent to
Yes.
But what was exciting last night, we went to Gulfstream and saw some of you might have seen it here at Technology. It was so amazing, and it's like, who knew Gulfstream was here, and who knew that they were doing this kind of stuff? So yeah, I think there's lots of
There's a lot of opportunity in virtual reality. I was just, the possibilities, and working in GIS, we work with a lot of emergency response. How do all those emergency response get into those areas where it's hot pockets, but yet they have to go into those areas. Providing that kind of technology, right? And that's here too at home.
Yeah.
So it's just a whole world of possibilities that's here in Savannah.
Great. Sure, why not? Of course, yeah.
We'll open the discussion to question and answer, and I'll come around with the mic. Who wants to go first?
So you talked about the myth of Silicon Valley and the archetype of the hoodie wearing, tech bro. How do we tell the story of Atlanta and of Chattanooga and Savannah and all these other tech hubs? Because when we talk to local politicians and state politicians, national politicians, they all think of, well, I want to be the next Silicon Valley. And it's like, no, you really, really don't want to be the next Silicon Valley. I've struggled with this. I don't know how do you tell that story?
I'll just make a quick comment, if you don't mind. So I know in Atlanta, the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce started this thing called Choose ATL, and their mission is to tell that story, and they've been brainstorming about ways to do that, whether it be through advertising or whatever. There was a great article in Delta Sky Miles magazine that talked about Atlanta being a tech hub, et cetera. So that's one way, but just, I don't know, maybe you guys have some.
So that was one of the examples I was going to bring up. I think it really depends on kind of showing those politicians what you can do. I think that's first. We had to have some successes before people even, why would you say choose ATL before there's a reason to choose ATL? But then we had Cabbage, who, being a unicorn in Atlanta. We had a few, successes in a row. And I think that made people say, oh, we can really build a startup ecosystem here. So that's one thing. And then to your point of, I don't want to be another Silicon Valley. First of all, the minute that you decide to mimic somebody or imitate somebody, you've already failed. Because you can't be them. You can't be better at being them than they are. So you need to figure out, what is it that you contribute? What is your thing? For instance, I just mentioned, in Atlanta, diversity is huge. And so we can kind of build that into what we're doing. And I think that gives us an edge, because one of the problems that you see with the lack of diversity in tech is that there's a homogeneity of ideas and problems to solve. And so you just keep solving the same problems over and over again, rehashing them, adding a little twist. But if you're bringing problems that are, kind of native to your environment, right? Native to your communities, that's something that no one else has, right? So start building there. Start solving the problems in your communities and figuring out, how do we monetize this? And then kind of after some point of having, a string of successes, it becomes pretty evident to, I would hope, politicians that we need to start investing in us. But that seems to be what happened in Atlanta.
I want to add also that we certainly don't want to mimic Silicon Valley, because they are the community with the biggest diversity problem ever. We may start mimicking that, we'll never get past this point. But also, What I've seen in the past in other communities is go down to the constituency level of the state politician, because the House is where they are very, very embedded in their community. And believe it or not, community outreach and reaching out to those House and inviting them into something like this is very effective. Because we don't have anybody here from City Council, from Savannah City Council. Do we have anybody here from there? Start with that. That is really, really critical, because at the grassroots level, where they have they are very, very responsible to their local constituency at the House, Senate. I wouldn't even say that, but even here locally at the Chatham County or City of Savannah, there should have been some people here. Yeah.
And to piggyback that, start electing tech-savvy officials.
Yeah.
Because we have, so, like, we invited our...
You're gonna run.
We invited the president of the Atlanta City Council that is now running for mayor of Atlanta to our hackathon, and he was happy to be there. And he understood the issues with diversity in tech. There was someone else that we wanted to come, and hopefully we'll get him at our next one, Kwanzaa Hall, who is super techie. And I think that having these people as part of your political figures in the city, I think helps push the case for you.
That's right, because they talk amongst each other. It's important. So I think we had another.
Yeah, excuse me. Another thing that you can do is to get involved in the Georgia WIN. Georgia WIN stands for Women in Numbers, and they're all about diversity of all kinds and supporting and saving, protecting the First Amendment. Who's next?
He's in the back.
Oh, go ahead.
That's okay.
Recording.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry.
You could
They're
give it to
recording.
him.
Yeah, they're recording, so it'll be better.
Sorry.
There we go.
Yeah, so I work for the Economic Development Authority here, and my job is to start creating that ecosystem, right? And I'm a Morehouse grad, so HBCU.
Told you.
And I'm a developer too as well. So I got kind of a challenge, but also a question, right? So what we need like to plug into the places that have already been successful, Atlanta, and to plug into people who understand, because I think like Savannah, what we have is like this issue where the people who know, like this gentleman right here, become the people who get dragged into everything, and then they get tired, right? And so my challenge is like I would love to like collaborate with you all, right? So we've got an organization that Kevin's a part of too called Urban STEM Academy, and these are actually some of our students right here, and we help them learn how to code and all that stuff. But we need like successful people to come and talk to the people that write the checks and tell them that this is a thing, because we're also fighting like the managing up battle, right? Savannah is, even in government, a very traditional like thing, right? I'm the only black person that works at the Economic Development Authority, right? And so that affects how we approach problems. But my question is, like you talked about creating the organic growth, right? And having the businesses that we can put our talent into. So we don't have that yet. Like, what is the best way to kind of grow that? I mean, we've got the coding boot camps that just started, and we've got like some accelerators, but it seems like when they get to a certain point, like around the 15 employee level, they fly away, right? What can we start doing to support like those companies so that they stay here?
That sounds like a funding, like investment problem. The fact that, at first I thought you were going to say, how do you start it? But it sounds like you've already started it. The fact that they can't, and I think they're leaving for funding. I mean, because I had a startup that I started with my husband a while ago. And this was before Atlanta was really kind of solidifying itself as a startup hub. And so we thought about like, maybe we move to San Francisco for a few years just to get it started. Because that's where the money was. So I had been at a few startup weekends and a few other things. And actually, Jen is an organizer of Startup Weekend in Atlanta. And it seemed like the only companies that could actually get funding and could actually get exposure were really traditional companies. None of the fun, kind of sexy tech stuff. It was always like, oh, well, this is real estate, and we know real estate in Georgia, so that company is getting the funding. And so if you had an idea outside of the traditional, you didn't get the funding for a while there in Atlanta. So if there's a way to start bringing those investors here, if there are investors here, convincing them that there's more than just the traditional. I don't know how you go about doing that. So for us, it happened organically. And I have a suspicion that those companies that were successful very early on, their funding is probably very diverse, and most of it did not come from Atlanta or come from Georgia.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Are there like women and African American venture capital funds that exist?
Yeah, so we started our own fund. Yeah, so we started a fund because we found in the report, we being Digital Undivided, some of the founders of Digital Undivided, a founder and a woman who worked for JP Morgan Chase, because in the report we found that we lacked training, we lacked access to capital, and we lacked the networks to, the connections. And so we started a fund called the Harriet Fund, named after Harriet Tubman. Project Diane is named after Diane Nash, who was a civil rights activist, but who didn't get the recognition similarly to the women in Hidden Figures, right? So, so we started a fund, and each of the companies that went through our incubator, we gave them, we like to call it confidence money, like a little bit of money. You got this investment. We want you to, work on your company, take the risk, come to Atlanta where it's cheap and you can live and eat at the same time, and grow your business. And so we did that. So you could talk to me about that. And then there are others who've started funds, but we have to raise. We're raising for that and are looking to invest in other companies besides those. Initially, the fund was for the companies that went through our program exclusively, but now we're looking outside of that as well.
So another thing that I've noticed, in a lot of the, probably New York and DC, Silicon Valley, of course, but also Seattle, they worked really closely with the educational academic institutes too, right? Even just like Atlanta, like Georgia Tech, right? That was the hub, and that's where a lot of funding comes through. That's my goal at Savannah State. So I am actually creating an industry advisory board for the computer science department at Savannah State. So Kevin is actually the first person that's on my board, but then we just looked at each other and said, okay, well, I found the other person that's on my board. Yes. But we're, just like sending some of he does rail bridge, right? Every quarter. And I was like I think I was on Twitter early that Saturday morning, making sure my Savannah State students were at that workshop. And I was just like, okay, you got it, you're checking in on them and what have you, but it's really because they didn't even know. My thing is that a lot of the community, what we're doing here in Savannah, you all are in your little pockets. Number one, you need to collaborate. There has to be one person or one place coming together, even twice a year. Hey, you guys are doing the same thing. You're all in your silos, but you don't know what you're doing and how you can amplify each other. And that's number one. And then leverage some of this academic institutes that's here. And I think everybody, again, they're all working in their silos. We have all these coastal, Savannah Votech, we have Savannah State, we got Armstrong here. A lot of the coastal colleges and universities, they don't even speak to each other. There should have been some consortium or something that's happening that's in this region. That's the second thing that needs to happen. But then also from a community standpoint, a lot of these, what I saw at Silicon Valley is that they know that investment happens when you are solving problems inside your own community. It will thrive. There's 4 black women that started at a Georgia Tech Flashpoint program. Do you remember? You didn't remember? And the reason why, they were in hair technology. And you know, black hair is like $1 billion industry. And they're tapping into something that's already existing, but solving something so unique. And that's what investors are looking for. And I think the third thing is that maybe when you guys can collaborate something together, you can have like a startup weekend. There is a startup weekend. There's already a format and everything. You can just follow it and just maybe implant it and have something here in Savannah just once. But then that will bring investors from others too. So those are the 3 areas for me, I think, you know.
And I would just say that maybe for the first 2, you might have to bring in investors from
Yes.
other locations.
Yes.
But after a while, like you said, people will start to see the value coming out of this, and they'll flock to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's probably the next thing.
We drove over in an Uber, and the young man who was driving us goes to Savannah State. He's a computer science major, and he was like, Geekend? What? He's like, I check my emails every day. I didn't see anything. And so we were like, well, it's happening tomorrow. I don't know. But, you know, yeah, you definitely have to get information out. And then for us, we did our demo day in Atlanta, and we had about 25% of the investors or the attendees. Some of them investors came from out of Atlanta because I think there's a lot of, they do cybersecurity there and other stuff that isn't, fintech, which, you know, our companies, you know, range in what they offer, but it wasn't fintech. So we brought people in. So you definitely have to do that.
I think the number one thing is that there's got to be some central, I mean, what's going to happen to all of this communication? I mean, how do we get connected after we leave here today or tomorrow, right? How do we stay connected? Because if you are looking to really bring in diversity, you have these 3 women up here today that you can always reach out to and say, hey, and you have all of these here in this room that you can also reach out to. But where do we go after this conference? And this conversation can't stop here. It has to continue into the community. So what do we do? Right? Maybe that's a Laura question, an action item for you. Maybe there's a email list or something as simple as that to connect. Or a Slack. There could be a Slack, a Geekend Slack.
Yeah, one more Slack.
Okay. techsav.co. techsav.co. And that's an automated inviter into the community. Okay,
So-
perfect.
I've got the question that goes the next step beyond that. And I'm definitely going to talk to you all after this one. So those who know me, I just recently joined a new bank in New York. The CEO is a woman. She's intentionally choosing to hire diverse staff. She came from Silicon Valley. She does not want to see a bro room as she walks in. So what I'm trying to do is I'm chief security officer, so I know the people in the security community. And I'll be honest, it's like any other one. I've been going to the largest conference in the world for 25 years. I know 4 black security people. And it's frustrating because, I mean, if anyone here plays Watchdog, I know the guy that game was based on. And he's this baddest hacker I've ever met in the world. So I've reached the end of my resources, and I'm trying to help find diverse staff. How do we bridge that community? As you're saying, we've talked about building a community, but now I need to find people. How do we, I'm definitely gonna talk to y'all, so don't worry about that piece, but how do other people who are trying to build companies and want to have the different mindset, the different opportunities, bridge these communities that don't exist, or they do exist amongst those who know about them, but I'm not a black woman, so I don't know what's going on in that community, so how do we bridge that gap, which is the follow on to that last question.
I'll start. It looks like we all had an answer for you, but someone mentioned this earlier. You know, most companies are recruiting from schools like MIT, Stanford, whatever, right? But there are talented.
I do want to repeat this.
Yeah.
This is not just, to go beyond going from the school to build a community and try and get some people started.
Yeah.
There are existing people working in the community.
There are.
Yeah.
If we're at a point right now, we need to hire junior developers. We need to hire people. I'm looking for, I would love to find a black woman CTO.
Yeah.
I would love to find that.
So
I know. I feel like you need to join the Slack that I started. It's like all these folks who are,
That's my downside to Slack. Slack
Yeah.
is a bunch of now private communities that you only know of if you ran into somebody who was on that level.
Right.
It used to be IRC. Yeah, there's thousands of IRC, but everyone was on FNet or they were on the dozen or so of the most popular channels. So
Yeah.
everyone was in one place.
Yeah.
Now, Savannah is different from Charleston, which is different from New York, which is different from Atlanta.
Yeah.
I'm on 15 Slacks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, give me your, I'll pass some people on to it. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so a lot of resources, like when I was talking about the women's organization, sisters.org, SYSTERS.org, and it goes directly to all of our affinity communities as well. BlackwomeninComputing.org, BlackwomeninComputing.org. There was, we started meeting together and making sure that we were talking about black women rather than other people were talking about black women, because there was something 2 years ago, I was like, hey, I can't find any black women who are who have PhDs in CS. Well, if you go to blackwomen.org, you probably will find who don't have a PhD or 4. So we just held our first inaugural conference in DC, and the room was filled with black women, computer science majors, in about 150. So that's a group. Also, there's women, probably don't know this either, women in cybersecurity and
Actually, it's very quick. In cybersecurity, Tierra and the whole group, I'm one of the founding sponsors. I'm very involved in the security space.
yeah, so we hold a women in cybersecurity conference every year. So there's a lot of just getting access to all of the information, and maybe we create as that Slack. Maybe we create a Slack channel just for maybe resources, so that we can actually all of us join, put what we know, and then you'll know that too. And it's really about passing on that knowledge.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I will just contribute my resources to that Slack group.
It's starting to get late. People are starting to get a little bit antsy, but we have 2 people in queue with questions, with cues. So, ma'am?
Communicating. I'm a high school teacher, and do you have advice for high school teachers, middle school teachers, elementary school teachers on how to build up those students as they're growing up and as they're coming through the school system that often, I mean, you all know we have problems, but what are some words of wisdom that you would have for us?
So we did a pilot program with a company in Atlanta called Band of Coders to start a girls' academy. And we noticed that when we were marketing it to them, like, we're going to teach you how to code, they were like, I don't care about that. But once we told them that you could create something, that you could create your own app, they were like, I want to know how to do that. They didn't really care that coding was how you did it. They just wanted to be able to create. And so I think if you can kind of convince kids that this is how you can create something, and if you catch them early, catch them before middle school, because by middle school you're interested in boys. People have told, society has told girls they don't do math by this point. So try to catch them before any of those societal kind of pressures kind of get there, and that's why you want to catch them early. And then maybe partner with some of the tech groups in your area, because again, we've been partnering with several of the high schools in the area. We're working towards middle schools. We're trying to kind of go down to the elementary school level as well. So that's what I would do. I would start reaching out to those communities to see if anybody would be interested in doing like an after-school program.
And you don't use the word coding. I mean, I think the messaging is so skewed that that's the only thing that's happening in this space, but it's not. It's really very creative space, problem solving, critical thinking, but it's really, don't just remove the word from coding, but also if you can get into CSTA. Are you familiar with Computer Science Teachers Association? So that's at csta.org, and Barbara Erickson out of Georgia Tech. She's also a PhD candidate right now, but she runs the Georgia CSTA, and she puts out information all the time.
I also would add your local library. I actually just did a presentation at the American Library Association Midwinter Conference, and they were very into technology and working with schools. So I would say that. And then as a former PTA president, I would say if you have a parent-teacher association and you have a good relationship with them, they can make a lot of things happen with the students and helping you to get students in the room to do things like create apps and websites.
What was the Slack channel again?
techsav.co. Yeah.
I just want to thank you guys so much for being here today. It's a pleasure listening to all of the wisdom that you have to share with us. This has been great. For me personally, I think we've touched on a lot of topics that are very important to women in general in this profession. And for me, my biggest challenge is at the end of my boot camp, I'm going to be a junior developer with nowhere to go. So being in the city of Savannah, where they need to just sort of open their eyes and realize what is actually out there and where things are moving and kind of get on board. I guess I'm looking for more of advice to sort of keep me here and to help bring businesses here. Patrick works with that and sees how that's going. But just as a woman, I mean, you're in a male predominant field already, and being in a city that does not offer a lot of companies for you to go to, a lot of developers are on their own working remotely. There's nowhere for me to really go and join a team where I can continue to learn and further my education professionally after I'm finished. So instead of leaving and taking jobs away from the city where I'm from and want to stay, what would you guys sort of suggest?
The first thing I would suggest is finding a mentor, because in absence of those companies and having that kind of physical environment, having somebody that's holding you accountable for any projects that you're working on is going to be super helpful. And you may have to look outside. You may have to get that remote opportunity. But the mentor will kind of reinforce things here. So that would be my first thing. And then I would try to see if there are other like-minded people, other people that are having the same issues, and starting a group with them. Because then you can start to kind of build some momentum on what you're learning. And then maybe, through their contacts, meet the right person and find some companies here that you can start working at. But I would not kind of throw out working remotely. Even as a junior developer, I do realize that having somebody right there that you can learn from is super important as a junior developer, but having that mentor could also help with that.
And in the industry now, virtual teams are more required than any time, so you'll have a leg up on having that experience of being remote. So my team, I was the first remote employee for my organization, and even they're in Silicon Valley, they're in Palo Alto, but they only meet in person Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we're a women organization, we gotta think about other stuff too, but it's the flexibility that a lot of women need. There's this Catherine Zaleski, she's a co-founder of powertofly.com, and that's strictly, they post positions, remote positions, technical positions, so you may want to just check that out as well. I'm actually seeing her next week, so I'll definitely just drop and you can still have mentors that are, with technology, you can get on a Skype or Hangout and have that communication. I mean, you definitely want to have some contact, FaceTime, but with technology nowadays, I mean, you can always have that, right? And so
there's a company called Thinkful that has kind of a online tutorial, but they partner it with a online mentor. So that could be really useful until you find that mentor here. And people speak very highly of them. So.
And I promote entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. Well, I encourage everyone to do whatever you can to promote diversity until it becomes the norm. Diversity that crosses all lines of prejudice. Look for ways to get involved. Be involved. And make that commitment from your heart. Find a cause that especially excites you, that especially worries you, and do something. Diversity should be the norm. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Wonderful.